CGP Grey made a video over 10 years ago called Humans Need Not Apply. It was one of those fascinating pieces that stays with you. He makes great arguments and supports them well. In fact, if you peruse through his comment section, you will see comments praising the video for how well it has aged. And honestly, particularly with the rise and proliferation of so-called AI and LLMs the past few years, I genuinely do not blame people for sharing this sentiment. But in spite of all the good arguments made by CGP Grey in that video, I still want to disagree. And I think I can convince you as well if you stick with me. Full disclosure, I am a software engineer myself, so I'm not going to pretend to be objective here. I don't think anyone is, honestly. But I don't think that takes away from the merit of my counter arguments. But before I dive into why I disagree with Grey, let's dive into his main arguments. Automation does not guarantee better jobs for humans. Anything humans can do can ultimately be automated. Workers fighting against technology always lose. Bots don't need to be perfect, just better than humans. Let's tackle the first argument. Automation does not guarantee better jobs for humans. This is probably true, though I suspect this may fall into category of an unfalsifiable claim, because how would one even go about disproving it? But the inclusion of the word guarantee does make it fairly easy to grant this point. When does one thing ever guarantee anything else? But one can easily flip this axiom on its head. Why would automation guarantee the loss of human jobs? Or more specifically, the complete loss of human jobs? Try as he did to prove that everything can be automated away, Grey himself quietly made concessions regarding the total number of jobs that will be automated away. So, while I agree that automation does not necessarily mean a net gain for humans in terms of jobs created, it does not necessarily follow that automation means destruction of all jobs in a given field. Saying anything humans can do can be automated is a tricky one, but my issue with this claim is that it's probably irrelevant. Even if you can fully automate a job from a technical standpoint, you still have to factor in the human element. And frankly, this is what is missing from Grey's analysis. Jobs aren't created and performed in a vacuum. It is for our benefit. As an example, call center jobs can be automated in many cases, but how many people are willing to talk to bots or deal with a fully automated experience? Some people just want to interact with humans for certain things. If there were robots that could fully do the jobs of CNAs and PCAs, how many people would be lining up to have their loved ones taken care of by robots rather than a trained person? Some will for sure, but many others will find that thought appalling, and no amount of data points would change that. Humans are not perfectly rational beings. Even the example of self-driving cars prove this. The reason why today, some 10 years after Grey's video was published, we are still no closer to self-driving cars being ubiquitous is because for self-driving cars to be safer than humans, there simply cannot be humans on the road as well. Expecting autonomous vehicles to coexist with the very unpredictable and messy humans they are trying to replace makes no sense, because they cannot be programmed to account for every possible situation. Humans can adapt to novel situations. Programming an autonomous vehicle to deal with novel situations is possible, but you can never be certain of the outcome. So literally every single person would have to agree to never drive again. How realistic is that? And even if it was realistic, it still would not account for pedestrians. The point of workers fighting against technology always lose has historically proven to be true. Though the recent writer strike is a notable exception, where they successfully rallied against the use of generative AI. This again goes back to my previous point. Technology is definitely powerful, and those that underestimate future technological advancements are usually proven wrong. But it is important to remember that these advancements are still for humans, by humans, in a human world. There is this weird short-term vision of perfect efficiency where everything is done by robots that never get tired, costs go down for companies, and they streamline everything, maximally improving efficiency. All of this, by the way, would be happening in a society that hates poor people so much that any excuse is used to cut social programs. So I'm supposed to believe that everyone's jobs will be replaced? Who will be the customers? At some point, the question of what technology is capable of becomes a moot point. Real life does not exist in a vacuum. The technological ability for a job to be automated away must be at least relatively congruent to the desire to have it automated away as well. So, while I don't even necessarily agree that every human can be replaced by technological advancements, I can grant that it is technically feasible, but still will never happen. And even the jobs that are automated away typically spawn entirely new jobs and industries when they are replaced. Because to replace a human cleanly without creating additional jobs would mean a perfectly self-sustaining micro ecosystem. You can replace a barista with a robot, but will that robot run indefinitely, never have bugs, never need maintenance or repair? It is a game of inches. Automation, as far as I can tell, will always inch closer to the gap of replacing humans, but in many cases, new issues will pop up. Then there's the issue of technological advancement itself. It would only be possible for all humans to be replaced if we just stopped involving ourselves in our own affairs entirely. We would basically be allowing bots and AGI to run our society, meaning the death of true human expertise over time, guaranteeing that humans will be at the complete mercy of artificial intelligence. This simply does not make sense practically speaking. One does not even need to imagine a doomsday scenario where our robot overlords condemn us. One simply just has to realize how far civilization and education has come to understand why this would not make sense. We would essentially be turning off our brains on purpose just to exist in a world that we no longer understood and one that honestly would not serve us. But okay, it may not be practical for bots and AI to replace every single human job, but that was not necessarily the point of Gray's video, right? He was speaking more so from a technical aspect. That technically speaking, every job that can be done by a human can eventually also be done by AI or a robot. And just to be perfectly clear, I think even within that narrow scope, this claim is still incorrect. I could be wrong, of course. I do not have access to the future and future technological breakthroughs, so maybe I am wrong. It is important to temper expectations a bit when it comes to technological capabilities and future advancements. From the Industrial Revolution through present day, we have seen practically an exponential improvement in technological capabilities, many times even within the course of a single generation. There are people who watched tiny black and white TVs as kids who would eventually own a smartphone as an adult. Witnessing that kind of leap in technological advancement within your own lifetime can understandably give you the impression that anything is possible given enough time. And it might be, but not necessarily. Just on the most basic level, we are restrained by the laws of physics, meaning there are just certain things that we already know for certain we will never be able to achieve. But beyond that, there are still other important limiting factors to consider. Even accounting for the collective genius of the best human minds, coming up with technology that entirely replaces work done by humans typically means accounting for the little things to an extreme degree. Truth be told, replacing 80 to 90, maybe even 95% of human labor is probably not that hard. But that last 5 to 20% is not to be underestimated. And in fact, that's typically the hardest problem to solve. In software engineering, we call it the 90-90 rule, which states the first 90% of the code accounts for the first 90% of the development time. The remaining 10% of the code accounts for the other 90% of the development time. In logistics, it's called the last mile problem. So called because the final mile typically accounts for 53% of total delivery costs. It's easy to look at much of what people do on a daily basis and imagine that there has to be a more efficient way to automate their job without considering what humans do around the margins. A teacher is not just a teacher. If all you need is a program to regurgitate facts to students and then test them on it later, we could have replaced teachers a long time ago. Teachers can quickly adapt to the needs of individual students in both academic and non-academic ways, in a way that wouldn't even make sense for a bot. And even when trying to speak about automation from a purely technical aspect, as I've already mentioned before, you simply cannot divorce the reality of what function the automation serves. Much of, if not all of what a financial advisor does can absolutely be replaced with a well-programmed AI bot. And to be fair, for a certain type of customer, this is actually ideal. But the fact that some people want a professional that they can build rapport with over time, someone whose instincts they feel that they can trust, this cannot be written off as a weird exception to the rule, or just as a few irrational people that needs to be accounted for while people adjust to technological advancements. It is an inherent part of the human experience and condition to seek other humans that we can trust. And as long as this is the world for us, it does also, at least in part, need to be by us. There is actually a bigger, more legitimate concern when it comes to bots, AI, and automation, however. The truth is that even if every single job was automated away from humans, we would simply need to rethink the entire economy, most likely in the form of some sort of universal basic income, which is already long overdue in my opinion anyway. But since I see this as extremely unlikely to begin with, the real danger lies not in technology replacing us, but augmenting us. With increased technological advancements, one would think that humans could focus on perhaps less tedious aspects of their jobs and enjoy a better work-life balance as the need to work as many hours decreases. One would be wrong though. What's already happening is that with technological assistance, workers are expected to do more work. Productivity must always go up at the end of the day. Technological advancements in the workplace do not benefit workers. They benefit capitalists. At no point are we able to rest and enjoy the benefits of AI. As the popular meme on the internet goes, humans doing the hard jobs on minimum wage while the robots write poetry and paint is not the future I wanted. And while it may seem reasonable at first to have an expectation of higher output at work because there are now tools to aid with output, why should workers participate in a system that will only negatively affect them but benefit their employers? Employers get more output, employees get to do more work for the same pay. Even if the effort to complete that additional work is identical to what they were doing before, it is still in employees' best interest to abstain from participating. To circle back to the example of the writer strike, they specifically railed against the use of AI, not because they were fearful of eventually being entirely replaced by AI, that's extremely unlikely, but rather because they were already feeling the effects of stripped down writers' rooms, which result in fewer writers having jobs and worse pay for the writers that do have jobs. And that's the thing about AI, bots and automation in general. It isn't going to replace us fully. That's too hard of a problem. What is realistic, however, is paring down human involvement in steps. Step 1 is expecting more output from workers for the same pay. So workers work the same amount of hours, do more work, and get paid the same. Step 2 is expecting more work from fewer employees. This is when layoffs and hiring freezes happen. We can already see this in the tech industry, where tech giants are bragging about a large percentage of their code being generated by AI, and getting a job as a software engineer practically requires a blood sacrifice. Step 3 is where workers are cut to part-time to save labor costs. This is the sweet spot for employers. They can rotate between independent contractors and part-time employees as needed, pay them minimally, and not have to concern themselves with trivial matters such as employee benefits. So no, humans do not need to worry about being replaced, at least not fully. We need to worry about being pushed out of the ability to lead a meaningful existence as members of a society by a greedy capitalist ruling class that see us as nothing more than at best a means to an end, and at worst an annoying inconvenience. And if you think this is just the whiny ramblings of a lazy socialist, consider this. Even from the perspective of the incredibly greedy and slimy capitalists, this strategy is a mistake, as they try to force as many workers as possible into reduced roles and freeze hiring. They will see a talent drought when their pool of workers age out. Prospective employees, tired of trying to get into a given industry, will be forced to move on, because getting a job in their given field essentially becomes impossible. This means that eventually, when employers do need to replace their existing talent, that well will long have been dried out, creating a talent shortage so severe that they will be forced to overpay anyone that is even remotely qualified. This is the problem with treating employees like disposable resources rather than the valuable commodities that they are. Whether or not AI can replace you at your job is a moot question at the end of the day. The question is, will you recognize your leverage and allow it to happen? Now, I may have let it slip a couple times in the video that I am a software engineer, and I'm bringing it up now for a very specific purpose. I do want to introduce you to CandorCloud.com. It is a cloud storage web app that I built myself from scratch and still working on. And the reason I am mentioning it is because rather than push a Patreon where I feel the need to come up with creative incentives and rewards for my patrons, I decided I would rather provide you direct value. So if you would like to support this channel and help it grow, please go to CandorCloud.com. If you want, you can just check it out by starting with the free tier, 10 gigabytes for free, 100% free. We also have monthly, annual, and lifetime plans where you can just make one purchase and you have the storage for the lifetime of the service, or your lifetime, whichever ends first. And it is a great way to support this channel. And like I said, new features are still being worked on. Currently in the paid tiers, there's a music player, a video player, and client-side zero knowledge encryption. So please check it out, and there'll be more to come. Thank you. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Share with your friends.